Hello, welcome to the Authority Club. My name is Sue Richardson and I'm the publisher of the Authority Guides, practical guidance for the busy business owner and business professional. Today I'd like to welcome Palma Michel. Palma is the author of the Authority Guide to Mindful Leadership. Simple techniques and exercises to manage yourself, manage others and effect change. Lovely to see you. So, welcome to the Authority and the Authority Club. We're very excited about your book, which is coming out on the 3rd of April, the Authority Guide to Mindful Leadership. Perhaps you could start off by telling our members a little bit about you and your background and what you've done in the past and what led you to write this book.
Okay. I'm also very excited about being here and the book coming out and to bring it to everyone who sort of has an inclination to learn a bit more about this. Where do I start? I was kind of interested very early on in sort of philosophy and psychology, but also a bit in spirituality. But I was also very ambitious. So I studied law, I worked for a strategy consultancy, and then later on sort of climbed the corporate ladder until I was a junior partner in 2 of the top 5 global executive search firms. I also lived in different places. I spent some time in New York. I spent 5 years in Hong Kong. I worked in Zurich. I worked in London. So it was quite interesting, really, that I met so many people from all different walks of life. Many, many people who were really at the top of their game because I worked as a board level headhunter. And not just working with executives, but I also worked a lot with board, composing advisory boards and bringing Asian non-executive directors onto global boards. So to sum it up, I've seen really a lot of examples of really fantastic leaders over the years. But I've also seen examples of not so great leaders. And in some ways, some of the damaging effects they can have on the teams they're leading, in terms of really kind of stifling creativity in their organizations, but also their teams. But also in sort of the broader picture, some of the damaging effects they can have on the whole organization, and in some ways also on communities. I also felt as a headhunter in some ways it was a bit limiting what one could do, because one could always just place the best performers into a new organization. Whereas I saw many people who had lots of potential, but maybe they needed some nudge or someone who could hold a space for them. And that's how I got really interested in coaching as well.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Mm.
So, for those that aren't aware of it, what is mindful leadership?
So to me, it's really about managing from the inside out, not just from the outside in. And I mean, when people hear the word mindfulness or mindful leaders, obviously they might have some ideas already about what mindfulness is. And to me, it really starts by leaders to look at themselves first, really learn how to manage themselves. And by bringing mindfulness to any situation and training yourself in mindfulness, there's a lot of self-awareness that's created. And the more we are aware of ourselves, the more we can be aware of others, in particular also sort of not just the people we're directly leading, but we can also sort of see the bigger picture and stand back and see the bigger picture. And as a natural result of that, we're no longer just focused on ourselves and kind of unaware of some of the things that are driving us. We will take very different decisions. So to me, a mindful leader is really someone who acts in the greater benefit of all, not just in their own benefit, definitely in the benefit of their organization, but who also sort of has an idea about the role their company plays within the community, and also kind of understands the responsibility that every leader these days has to either contribute to making the planet better or contributing to destroying it in some ways, even more indirectly or directly.
Yes. Gosh, it's so interesting, isn't it? That, quite often, I know as a business owner myself, I can get very, very wrapped up in the stuff that's, right in front of me and that needs to be dealt with on a day-to-day basis. And of course, you're so right. In these times, in a sense, whatever size of company we have, or whatever we're doing in terms of leadership, we have to think of that bigger picture. I think it's so important, and I think it's very interesting what you flag up. I mean, do you see the world, getting better because we have better leaders, or I mean, you really see it as, is it, what's happening today that means that kind of for us leadership becomes really, really important?
I mean, you see, I think in general the world is a better place than it has been
Yes.
10 years ago.
Right.
I mean, sometimes we read the news and we might get the idea that we're really living in a terrible world, but it's really not the case. There's more peace on the planet, more wealth for everyone, so it's definitely a better place. But on the other hand, what's happening, we do live in pressure cooker times. We live in a time really that has seen much more change than ever before. And even the last 3 years, if we look at the technological advances, much more has happened than in the last 20 years or so. And kind of that speed is going to be exponentially even faster, I'd say, in the future. And then on the other hand, there are these big questions like climate change. Do we believe in it or not? But there's just a lot of stuff happening for individuals. And we should never forget every leader is also an individual. We're all just humans. And what most leaders find these days is that they really don't have enough time and space to think. Their agenda gets fuller and fuller and fuller. They feel more and more and more under pressure. And the thing is, when humans are under pressure, they often do things that are not very smart. And it's not because they have bad intentions or because they're bad people or they have bad values, but it's kind of just a part of their brain taking over that's favoring short term, speedy decisions, impulse. And for the most of it, people are not aware of that happening. And when I learned about this, really, kind of, that we all have this part of our brain, which is millions of years old and stems back more to the hunter gatherers or cavemen, and that brain is part of the brain is still in action when we're faced with difficulties or pressure. And let's face it, whoever is running a business will be faced with difficulty and pressure. And then looking at the current environment with all of this uncertainty, as there is so much change, meaning that this type of the brain has a much, much higher sort of probability of getting switched on. So when I learned about this, I thought, my God, this is so important, and we never speak about this. Just seeing that it's not that they're bad leaders or good leaders, they're just some leaders who have understood what's happening within them when they are triggered or not triggered, and how to manage themselves in that way. And then learning about neuroscience, that we can train our brain and really retrain it to notice in the heat of the moment that actually our sort of primitive reptilian brain is switched on. And in that moment, having the ability to step back, see what's happening, see the bigger picture rather than having a tunnel vision. And that this is just a matter of training your brain on a regular basis. It seems to me an absolute no-brainer that you want and have to train yourself if you want to lead in this today's environment.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's so funny, isn't it? Because we, as business owners, as leaders, we, we constantly are upskilling, we're constantly learning new things, we're training our teams, or we put a lot of effort into improving what we do all the time. How often do we actually sit and look at ourselves and realize that we can train our brains in this way? I mean, it's a wonderful thing. So, is it actually? I mean, I know you talk about this obviously a lot in the book. Is it really mostly kind of meditation practices that help you to do this?
I mean, I would be lying if I wouldn't say meditation is not the most effective thing to reshape your brain structure.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, it's very, very important to really make clear that a mindful leader is not just a leader who meditates.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
so to me, kind of, let's say the 10 minutes meditation in the morning that I suggest in the book, but one, don't be scared by the 10 minutes, one can start with a shorter time frame. But that's really like brushing your teeth. That's kind of something essential.
Yes.
But then the mindful leadership is also more kind of having that awareness about what happens in your brain,
Yes.
and of really noticing in yourself, okay, is this my caveman brain that's currently on? Or am I more in my executive brain and I have a broad outlook and I'm really calm? And that's by noticing really also what happens in someone's body. Like many people find it completely normal that their shoulders are tense, that their breathing is shallow, that their heart is beating, or they're walking around restless in a room. And then they find themselves maybe the next moment blowing up at someone.
Yeah.
But if we get familiar with these physical symptoms, then we can do something about it. And that gives us a choice point. So to me, a mindful leader is someone who's not just listening to the commentary in their minds, in their brains, their thoughts, and sometimes these feedback loops, but who also notices what's happening in their body and who can then potentially use a breathing technique in the heat of the moment to calm themselves down. Um, and also someone who applies kind of these different skills and insights to whatever they're doing. Let's say if you are in a very boring meeting, you could use the person you're speaking to literally as your object of meditation to train your focus. So in this book, I will offer many different ways of how you can bring mindfulness into your daily life, which is not just meditating 10 minutes, an hour, 5 minutes in the morning.
Brilliant.
It involves how we treat others, that we meet others with more openness. It's not kind of my way or the highway type of leadership. And then we also get more comfortable with that space of not knowing, rather than having the feeling that we have to control every single item in our business and every single person that we're working with.
Gosh, tell me a bit more about that. That sounds quite scary to me, to be in a space of not knowing. Wow. I mean, I kind of get what you mean, but that's a difficult thing for most of us to kind of get our heads around, I think. Is that right? Do you find that that's something with the people that you work with that can be quite difficult for us to grasp?
It is exactly this space of not knowing because it's uncertainty, and in that space, you have to imagine when we were hunter gatherers, we were in the bush, we were trying to hunt a tiger, and all of a sudden, if we would hear just a small sound like this, would be unknown, our brain would flag up danger.
Yes.
We immediately get into this fight, flight, freeze reaction where we would either run as fast as possible, we would fight, or we would pretend we're dead. Now, the problem is in the 21st century, whenever we're in this space of not knowing or in the space of uncertainty, that's usually where humans want to get out as quickly as possible. So they very often just make any decision just to sort of end that not knowing. And that's precisely that moment when we do things that are not very smart. And I see it's very, very difficult for people if they're not training their mind. I see this with leaders, but I also see it, for example, I work in a hospice where I volunteer every week. And there it's the strangest thing. The worst for people is not knowing exactly the diagnosis. Once they know even that something's terminal cancer, they feel better. But the not knowing is usually the worst for people. And that's why it's so important that you cannot just get your head around that space of not knowing, but you really need to retrain yourself. That this is a space that can be used for insight, for creativity. Because if you ever think about all the great inventors that we have, they were in a space where they didn't know. And that's precisely when something could bubble up and a new insight could be created. But if we pretend we know everything there is to know, where's there room for creativity? It's just impossible for anything new to arise. So the more comfortable we can get with that space of not knowing. And sometimes we'll even find if there's a space of uncertainty and we think we have to take a decision, but if we can just sit and pause for a moment, very often actually the problem goes away without us doing something. But if we immediately do something, we might actually create a much bigger problem than there was there in the first place. And that doesn't mean that you should not do anything at all. But it means catching yourself in the moment where you feel uncomfortable knowing. And when you feel uncomfortable, it's a very clear sign that your caveman brain is triggered and that you're not acting from the most strategic or intelligent space that you normally would have access to.
Because mostly these days there isn't a tiger in the bushes.
No. Unless you're walking on a wildlife reserve. But it's so funny. I mean, for most people, it's like, I mean, they wake up in the morning, they look at their mobile phone first thing. Or it's not what's happening in the external world that sets off our caveman brains. But what sets us off is our very own thoughts of a situation or our appraisal of a situation. So you can have two people presented with exactly the same type of scenarios. One people get stressed and they fall into caveman type behavior, and the other person doesn't and can really remain calm, level-headed, clear, and act in a much more responsible manner.
And is that generally something? I mean, would you say it's a kind of that any of us could train our brains to be that second person, to be the person who is calm and can cope with that moment and pause until the right moment comes to make a decision?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I know you obviously there's lots of ideas in the book for us, but obviously you've said meditation is one of the most important aspects of this, and this daily practice that you think is a really almost fundamental part of what you suggest. Do you have any kind of suggestions for us to how we might develop that practice? Because it's quite hard to think of doing 10 minutes a day, and I have to say I would worry about finding that time. What tips would you have for us that might help us with that?
I mean, I think the first one is like whenever people say to me, I don't have the time to take out 10 minutes of my day to meditate, you should probably meditate an hour, because there's really something wrong with the day already in some way. But on the other hand, obviously creating new habits is really, really hard. And there are some really good explanations why that's the case, because our executive brain, unfortunately, can only be aware of about 7 things at the same time. So if you are a very busy business owner, professional CEO, most likely kind of that space is already filled with all these important things you need to do. So if you wake up in the morning and you decided, tomorrow I'm going to meditate, that's not specific enough. So most likely you wake up in the morning and you see there are all these things that you have to do. And most likely you will forget that you even made that intention to meditate. So if we want to start anything new in our life, and that's kind of quite similar actually if we make New Year's resolutions that for most people never really make it past the second week in January or something like that. We need to create new habits and really do this in a systematic way. So one thing that could be helpful is to really start by picking the right length. So if you're already freaked out by the idea of 10 minutes, why not pick a time that's not so scary? Let's say 5 minutes. And sort of pick a time that's a little bit challenging, but not too challenging that you wouldn't be doing. But let's agree maybe on 5 minutes that anybody could do 5 minutes in the morning. And then pick a time a day where you will be doing it. And it's much easier to form a new habit if you sort of combining it with something that you're already doing. So some of my clients and what they find helpful, they go in their living room, they sit on their favorite chair and they put the timer on for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. My brother, for example, he ties it to another activity. He ties it to his morning coffee. He has his espresso in the morning, and then whenever he had it, he does his meditation. Some other people, they find, okay, my morning, I'm already way too tired when I wake up. I cannot possibly find these 5-10 minutes. They sometimes do it on their morning commute, for example. They listen to my recording and they use their morning commute in a really nice way.
Oh, lovely.
So the moment, yeah, the commute can all of a sudden become a lot better. Having said that, though, some people find it a bit stressful to do this during their commute. They imagine they have to be in this sort of blissed out space when they're meditating. And the idea of the commute and the meditation doesn't really go together. Yeah. But it can be really useful. Another thing that some clients do, they do it first thing when they come to the office, actually. They go into an empty conference room, or if they have a room on their own, and then they do it for 5-10 minutes. And then other people do it just in the evening when they come home, either just when they arrive at home to sort of use as a signal. They place their keys down at home, they take off their coat, and that's when they do their meditation. And sort of that gives them sort of an extra boost in the evening, and in some ways it allows them to leave the work behind and be available for their families. And then even other people, they use it before they go to sleep, kind of, it's almost like a help to go to sleep for some.
Yes, yeah. That's brilliant. Lots of great ideas there, Palma. Thank you.
But maybe one thing I need to share also, because most people, they have this idea when you meditate, kind of like when you have a massage, that you immediately need to feel instantly relaxed. It doesn't help that Time magazine has these photos with models of famous actresses who look completely blissed out somewhere in a desert space and when they're meditating, because most likely that's not going to be the reality that you're going to find when you start. And what's much more likely to happen is that there will be tons of thoughts in the meditation. But it's really here simply the instruction is whenever you see a thought, come back to your object of focus, which will be the breathing. And you're not failing as a meditator, or you're not talented to do this if there are many thoughts. It's really just normal. And in some ways, the best meditation is actually one when you sit there for 5-10 minutes. You have tons of thoughts. It's maybe not the most pleasant experience, but you manage to bring your mind back again and again and again. So what you're also training is your level of patience, your level of equanimity, your level of being balanced in the face of something unpleasant, because usually we avoid unpleasantness. And you're really training your self-awareness. So don't despair if your first meditation experiences are not blissful. It's still very, very useful, because by training in that way, you're really reshaping your brain. So with meditation, unlike with a massage, it's not important what happens during your 5 or 10 minutes practice. But what is important is how do you show differently up in your life when you do this for a prolonged period of time.
That's fantastic, Palmer. I can really see that. I can see how it would be incredibly helpful for any busy person to have this time. How do you see it helping us when it comes to managing other people in our
Hmm.
businesses?
Well, I have to go back to the brain science, but it's obviously if we manage other people, and most likely everyone has experienced that already. Let's say when you're a little bit tired or you were under pressure about something, and then someone like a subordinate wants to have a conversation with you, you're most likely not listening to them in the most open manner, in the most compassionate way, but there is a tendency to cut them short, to maybe be a little bit abrupt, or maybe even in the worst case, blow up at someone that we're leading or at a board member. So that is one of the things where it can be really helpful, because if in that moment we notice, okay, um, I'm triggered in some way. So I can either ask for postponing a meeting, I can also regulate my nervous system down with a few breathing exercises, that I am again in my smart zone, in my executive zone, rather than in my caveman type behavior. So that can be really helpful. The other thing is what executives will notice the more they practice mindfulness is they will become much more aware of themselves, but that includes their own storylines and filters. So, most likely, with many people that you're already working with, you have formed opinions about them. This is the difficult person, it's the easy person, it's the smart one, that's the one that takes time for something. And the problem is, if as a leader you have these opinions about someone, most likely in every meeting you will just look for confirmation of those opinions. And that's not something that goes consciously on in our brains, but subconsciously. So, what one learns through this practice of mindfulness by creating more self awareness in the first place is then also questioning those initially formed assumptions, which allows more of an openness when we're meeting others and allows for relationship dynamics to change. And it's also much more empowering for people that you're leading if you're really present with them in a meeting and you're really seeing them. Because from my experience, what everybody craves, no matter how senior or unexperienced someone is, they want to be heard and seen. So if you as a leader can be really present with someone, it's almost like magic. And then the last thing is, given that normally we don't really like uncertainty, we don't really like resistance. So if you're in meetings with your team where it's about a new innovation for the company, or to brainstorm about novel ideas, sooner or later in a meeting like this, the team will be cooked, for example, or there will maybe be some friction because they're conflicting interests. So if you as a leader then get dragged down into this friction or into the conflict of interest, or you don't notice if your team is cooked, you're most likely not doing the best for helping the team come up with the most novel ideas. If, on the other hand, in a difficult situation like this, you can stand back and kind of more hold the container, like a container of calmness in which all these things can play out, then there's a much higher chance for coming to a much better result for the business in the end.
Fantastic, Palmer. Thank you. That's it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you. And this is work that you do with companies, isn't it? You go in and help people with this work. Can you tell us a little bit about your business?
Yes. Well, to me, it's always funny when someone asks me to talk about your business. It obviously is a business,
Yeah.
and it is a very successful business. But it used to be my hobby and my passion in the past.
Yes.
Feel so grateful every day that I can do this type of work.
That's lovely.
But I do a variety of things. So sometimes I just work with senior leaders like CEOs, CFOs, or founders or owners of businesses, just initially on really coaching them, but using mindfulness as well. Because what I've seen in the past is understanding something intellectually, and particularly understanding that I need to change, does not necessarily allow me to change. But experience something experientially, through the meditation, through the mindfulness practices, retrains our brain and reshapes our brains. And that sort of bridges the gap from wanting to do something and actually being able to do it. So that work is really empowering for senior leaders. The other thing I do is I have been creating and introducing mindful leadership programs to startup companies, to SMEs, but also to global multinational corporations as well. And that is very, very powerful, because cultures in organizations are always created from the top. And if leaders really think through how they're operating on an individual basis with each other, and when they're also looking at their purpose for their company, that goes beyond just, let's say, creating value for the shareholders, but really has some meaning in it, something that can excite everyone who's working for that business. And if that purpose becomes a lived reality, then that's kind of a more magical place to work at. And then the other thing I do is also more generally introducing mindfulness to any parts of organizations, including mindfulness and creativity, mindfulness and productivity, mindfulness and resilience. Mindful communication is a very popular one. So there's a whole variety of workshops that I offer to businesses. And initially what I see, it is, like you pointed out, Sue, in the beginning, quite hard for people to sit down and meditate and do it. But once they do it, and once they implement mindful meetings, for example, then it's really powerful what happens.
Yeah, I absolutely, I can see that. And it's fantastic the work that you're doing, Palma. And I think for anyone who wants to find out more, you have a website which we will be showing on the slide at the end of this video. So that'll be coming up in a moment. Palma, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. It's been an absolute delight working with you over the last few months to publish your book. And we're very, as I said earlier, we're very, very much looking forward to it being published on the 3rd of April. That's the Authority Guide to Mindful Leadership. And we are delighted that you're part of the Authority Guides. You're an authority with us, and we hope to have many more chats with you in future. But for now, just want to say thank you so much, and goodbye for now, Palma. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.